Hey, if you've ever been treated like you don't matter, this story will hit you differently. A 31-year-old fiancé humiliated every single maid who ever worked in that mansion, until one woman walked through those gates and refused to break. Everyone warned her. 6 maids had already quit in 4 months. The billionaire, only 34, barely noticed the cruelty happening under his own roof. He was too busy with boardrooms and business deals to see what his fiancée really was behind closed doors. But this maid was different. She didn't cry when she was insulted. She didn't run when she was humiliated in front of guests, soaked in cold water on the driveway like she was nothing. She stayed. And that decision was about to expose a secret that would destroy everything the fiancée had built her entire future on. Hey everyone, welcome back. Before we start, tell me in the comments, where are you watching from tonight? I love seeing how far this channel reaches. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button because we tell real, raw, emotional stories every single week. Stories about people who get underestimated, mistreated, and then rise anyway. Stay with me until the very end tonight, because the final twist in this story is one you will not see coming. Let's get into it. The gates of the Whitfield estate had swallowed 6 women in 4 months. Not literally, but close enough if you asked the staffing agency that kept sending replacements. Elena Vance stood at the wrought iron entrance with a single duffel bag over her shoulder, staring up at a mansion so large it looked like it belonged on a postcard, not in someone's actual life. She was 29 years old, and this was her 9th job in 6 years. Not because she was bad at her work. Because she'd learned the hard way that being good at your job means nothing if the people above you have already decided you're beneath them. You're the new one. A guard at the gate barely looked up from his phone. Elena Vance. I was told to report at 7 a.m. He buzzed her through without another word. The walk up the driveway took almost 3 full minutes. Marble fountains. Manicured hedges shaped like spirals. A garage with 4 cars that probably cost more combined than every home Elena had ever lived in. She had grown up in a 2-bedroom apartment with her mother, a woman who cleaned office buildings at night so Elena could go to school during the day. Her mother used to say, "Baby, we may not have much, but we never bow our heads to anybody." Elena carried those words like a shield. She was going to need them. Inside, the head housekeeper, a tired-looking woman named Marta, gave her a 15-minute tour that felt more like a warning than an orientation. The East Wing is Mr. Whitfield's private study. Never enter without being called. The kitchen staff eats at 6 before the family. And, Marta paused, glancing toward the grand staircase like she was checking for someone. Miss Camille. She's very particular. Particular how? Marta's jaw tightened. You'll see. Elena would understand exactly what that meant less than 2 hours later. Nathaniel Whitfield, 34 years old, was the kind of man magazines loved to photograph. Sharp jaw, tailored suits, a business empire that spanned 3 continents. He'd built his fortune from nothing after his father's company collapsed when Nathaniel was 22. People called him the Quiet King because he rarely gave interviews and never explained himself. He was also, according to every member of staff who had lasted longer than a month, almost never home. Meetings in Singapore. Calls with investors in London. A man who had built an empire so large he'd forgotten to build a life inside it, which left the mansion and its staff entirely in the hands of his fiancée. Camille Rousseau was 31, stunning in the way expensive things are stunning. Polished, curated, cold to the touch. She had been engaged to Nathaniel for 8 months, and in that time she had fired, humiliated, or driven away 11 household staff members. The engagement photos online showed a radiant couple. The staff who actually lived inside that house knew a very different story. Elena met her for the first time at 9:15 that morning, in the marble foyer, holding a tray of coffee she'd been told to bring immediately and do not be late. She wasn't late. She was early. It didn't matter. Camille descended the staircase in a silk robe, phone pressed to her ear, and didn't even look at Elena as she reached the bottom step. "This coffee better not be lukewarm again," Camille said, still on her call. She took the cup, sipped it, and made a face like she'd swallowed poison. "It's cold. It's actually cold. I just brewed it, Miss Rousseau. It should be. Are you arguing with me?" The foyer went silent except for the distant hum of the air conditioning. Elena's hands didn't shake. Her voice didn't waver. "No, ma'am. I'll bring a new cup." Camille studied her for a long moment, the kind of look people give something they're deciding whether to step on. "What's your name?" "Elena. Elena." She said it like she was tasting a word she didn't like. "The last girl lasted 11 days. Let's see if you beat that." She walked away without waiting for a response. Elena stood there, coffee cup trembling, not from fear, but from the sheer effort of holding back everything she wanted to say. She thought of her mother. "We never bow our heads." She went back to the kitchen and made a new cup of coffee. What Elena didn't know yet, what nobody in that house knew, was that Camille Rousseau's engagement to Nathaniel Whitfield wasn't built on love. It was built on a lie so carefully hidden that even Nathaniel himself didn't know the truth about the woman he was about to marry. And that truth had a name. A name that, in a strange twist of fate, Elena Vance already knew. But nobody could have predicted what would happen 3 weeks later, in front of the entire household staff. The first month passed in a blur of quiet humiliations. Camille found new ways to test Elena almost daily, moving items and blaming her for carelessness, criticizing perfectly ironed linens, timing how long it took Elena to answer a bell. Elena endured it all with a stillness that unsettled Camille more than any argument could have. "Why doesn't she quit?" Camille asked Marta one afternoon, watching Elena through the kitchen window as she hung laundry in the yard. "Maybe she needs the job, ma'am," Marta said carefully. "Everyone needs the job. That's not why they stay." What Camille didn't understand, what she couldn't understand, was that Elena wasn't staying because of the paycheck. She was staying because of her daughter. Elena had a 5-year-old girl named Sophie, waiting for her every evening in a small apartment across town, cared for by Elena's elderly neighbor while Elena worked. Sophie had been born 3 months premature. The medical bills from those first 2 years had buried Elena in debt she was still climbing out of. This job, humiliating as it was, paid enough to keep Sophie in the after-school program that let her stay warm and fed until Elena got home. Every insult Camille threw, Elena absorbed like rain on a roof. Rolled off. It had to. Sophie's face was the reason. But even steel bends eventually. It happened on a Tuesday evening, during a dinner party Camille was hosting for Nathaniel's business associates. The kind of event where every detail had to be perfect, because Camille's entire identity depended on appearing perfect. Elena was serving drinks on the terrace when she overheard something she wasn't supposed to hear. Camille, standing near the garden with a glass of champagne, was speaking quietly to her assistant, a sharp-featured woman named Priscilla. Elena caught only fragments as she passed. If Nathaniel ever finds out about before the accident, everything falls apart. She doesn't recognize you, does she? No. Thank God. It's been 10 years. I look completely different now. Elena froze for half a second, just long enough for the tray in her hands to tilt. A single champagne glass slid, shattering against the stone terrace. Every head turned. Are you serious right now? Camille's voice cracked like a whip across the garden. 20 guests in evening were stared at the maid standing over broken glass, her hands trembling, not from clumsiness, but from the words she just overheard, words that meant absolutely nothing to her yet, and everything. I'm so sorry, I'll clean it up immediately. Do you know how much that crystal cost? More than you make in a month, I'd guess. Camille's smile was venomous, performing for the crowd now. Actually, don't guess. I know exactly how much you make. It's pathetic. Laughter rippled through a few of the guests. Not everyone, but enough. Elena knelt and began picking up the shards of glass with bare hands, her cheeks burning, her vision blurring with tears she refused to let fall in front of these people. That was when Nathaniel Whitfield walked out onto the terrace. He'd been inside, finishing a phone call, and had missed most of what happened. But he arrived in time to see his fiancée standing over a kneeling woman with blood beginning to bead on her fingertip from the broken glass, while a crowd of wealthy strangers watched and did nothing. What happened here? His voice was quiet. Quiet in the way that made the whole terrace go still. Nothing, darling, she just broke a glass. Camille. He said her name like a correction. Then he crouched down, took Elena's hand gently, and looked at the small cut on her finger. You're bleeding. I'm fine, sir. Really? He looked at her for a long moment. Really looked, the way Elena hadn't been looked at by anyone in that house in 3 months. Not with pity. With something closer to recognition. As if he was seeing an actual person for the first time and wondering how long she'd been invisible. Go inside. Clean that up. Take the rest of the night off. Sir, I still have to. That's an order, not a suggestion. Elena nodded and walked inside. Her heart pounding for reasons that had nothing to do with the broken glass. Camille watched her go, jaw tight, smile still frozen in place for the guests. But her eyes had gone cold in a way that promised this wasn't over. Not even close. What Elena discovered in the guest bathroom that night would change absolutely everything. Elena didn't go straight to her quarters. Her hands were shaking too hard, and the words she'd overheard kept looping in her mind. Before the accident. She doesn't recognize you, does she? It's been 10 years. An accident. 10 years ago. Elena's chest tightened. 10 years ago, when Elena was 19, her older sister Marisol had been in a car accident on Route 9 outside the city. A collision caused by a driver who fled the scene before police arrived. Marisol survived, but barely. She spent 4 months in the hospital, and the family never received a single dollar in compensation because the driver who hit her was never found. Elena had spent years of her life, nights, weekends, entire summers, trying to track down that driver. Not for revenge. For closure. For her sister, who still walked with a slight limp and flinched at the sound of screeching tires. She went to the small bathroom near the servants' quarters to wash the blood from her finger, and that's when she saw it. A framed photograph on the hallway wall she'd passed 100 times without really looking at. It was Camille, 10 years younger, at some charity gala, standing beside a car that Elena would recognize anywhere. Silver, a distinctive dent already forming above the rear wheel. The same car. The same year. The same model that had struck her sister and disappeared into the night. Elena's stomach dropped. Could be a coincidence. Had to be. Thousands of silver sedans existed. But then she remembered the conversation on the terrace. Before the accident. Not an accident. The accident. She stood frozen in that hallway for almost 10 minutes, the photograph blurring in and out of focus as her mind raced through a decade of grief, medical bills, and unanswered questions. Could Camille Rousseau, the woman who mocked her daily, who threw champagne glasses worth of contempt at her like it cost nothing, be the same person who left Elena's sister broken on the side of a road and drove away without looking back? She needed proof. Not suspicion. Proof. That night, Elena couldn't sleep. She sat on the edge of her narrow bed in the staff quarters, staring at an old photograph of her sister before the accident. Smiling, whole, unafraid of the road. The next morning she asked Marta, carefully, casually, about that photograph in the hallway. "Oh, that old thing," Marta said, dusting a shelf. "That's from before Miss Camille had her surgery. Rhinoplasty, I think, and some other work. She looked completely different back then. Barely recognizable, honestly. Do you know where that photo was taken?" Marta shrugged. "Some gala, I think. Before she met Mr. Whitfield." "Why do you ask?" "No reason," Elena said, but her heart was pounding. Barely recognizable. That's exactly what Camille had said on the terrace. "She doesn't recognize you, does she?" Someone in that house, someone who had known Camille before her transformation, was walking around, unaware they were standing feet away from the woman responsible for Marisol's accident. Elena needed to know who that person was. And more than that, she needed to figure out what to do with a truth this dangerous, in a house where she had absolutely no power, no money, and no protection. She thought of Sophie. She thought of the debt still hanging over her family. She thought of what it would cost her to speak this truth out loud in a mansion owned by the very people who could destroy her livelihood with a single phone call. But she also thought of her sister's face the day the doctors said she might never walk normally again. And of her mother's voice. "We never bow our heads to anybody." Elena made a decision that night that would put everything she had at risk. She was going to find out the truth. All of it. No matter what it cost her. But what Elena didn't know was that Camille had already noticed her asking questions. Priscilla, Camille's assistant, had a talent for noticing things. A skill that had kept her employed by Camille for 6 years, far longer than any maid had lasted. And Priscilla had noticed Elena's strange behavior in the hallway, lingering near that old photograph, asking Marta careful questions with a face that was trying too hard to look uninterested. She reported it to Camille within the hour. She was asking about the old photo. The one from the Beaumont Gala. Camille's voice went sharp. "Just curious, it seemed. But I thought you should know." Camille sat very still for a long moment, her manicured nails tapping against her marble vanity. 10 years of careful reconstruction. New face, new name pronunciation, new accent trained out of a voice coach in Geneva, an entirely rebuilt identity funded by a settlement from her own family's lawyers who'd made the accident disappear from every record that mattered. 10 years of becoming someone new so completely that even she sometimes forgot the girl she used to be. And now a maid was asking questions. "Fire her," Camille said. "On what grounds?" Mr. Whitfield specifically told the staff to treat her well after the terrace incident. "If we fire her without cause, he'll ask questions." Camille's jaw clenched. She hated being right about this. Priscilla was correct. Nathaniel had taken an unusual interest in Elena's well-being since that night. He'd even asked about her at breakfast, something he'd never done for any staff member before. "Then make her life so unbearable she quits on her own," Camille said quietly. "Like the others." What followed was the cruelest week Elena had experienced in that house. But what Elena didn't know was that Camille had already noticed her asking questions. Priscilla, Camille's assistant, had a talent for noticing things. A skill that had kept her employed by Camille for 6 years, far longer than any maid had lasted. And Priscilla had noticed Elena's strange behavior in the hallway, lingering near that old photograph, asking Marta careful questions with a face that was trying too hard to look uninterested. She reported it to Camille within the hour. She was asking about the old photo. The one from the Beaumont Gala. Camille's voice went sharp. Just curious, it seemed. But I thought you should know. Camille sat very still for a long moment, her manicured nails tapping against her marble vanity. 10 years of careful reconstruction. New face, new name pronunciation, new accent trained out of a voice coach in Geneva, an entirely rebuilt identity funded by a settlement from her own family's lawyers who'd made the accident disappear from every record that mattered. 10 years of becoming someone new so completely that even she sometimes forgot the girl she used to be. And now a maid was asking questions. Fire her, Camille said. On what grounds? Mr. Whitfield specifically told the staff to treat her well after the terrace incident. If we fire her without cause, he'll ask questions. Camille's jaw clenched. She hated being right about this. Priscilla was correct. Nathaniel had taken an unusual interest in Elena's well-being since that night. He'd even asked about her at breakfast, something he'd never done for any staff member before. Then make her life so unbearable she quits on her own, Camille said quietly. Like the others. What followed was the cruelest week Elena had experienced in that house. Camille assigned her impossible workloads, cleaning the entire East Wing alone in a single day, a job that normally took 3 people. She accused Elena of stealing a bracelet that later turned up in Camille's own drawer, conveniently after Elena had been humiliated in front of the whole staff for it. She docked Elena's pay for damages that never happened. And then came the moment that broke through even Elena's steel resolve. What Camille did next would expose everything she'd spent 10 years trying to bury. The drive to Sophie's after-school program was quiet at first. Elena sat wrapped in Nathaniel's coat, mortified, unsure what to say to a man whose entire net worth probably exceeded the GDP of the town she grew up in. You didn't have to do that, she finally said. Yes, I did. His hands tightened slightly on the wheel. I should have done it a long time ago. I've been traveling so much, I let things happen in my own house that I'm ashamed of. Silence settled between them again, but it wasn't uncomfortable this time. Can I ask you something? Nathaniel said as they pulled up to the small community center where Sophie waited. Why do you stay? You could work anywhere. You're clearly better than this treatment. Elena watched her daughter through the window, a small girl in a yellow raincoat, waving excitedly at the sight of her mother's car, a car nicer than any Sophie had ever ridden in. Because that's my daughter, Elena said softly. And this job, as terrible as it's been, is the only thing standing between her and a much harder life. Pride doesn't pay medical bills, Mr. Whitfield. Something shifted in Nathaniel's expression, a mixture of respect and quiet shame. That night, after dropping Elena and Sophie at their small apartment, Nathaniel insisted, and Elena was too exhausted to argue. He drove home with a heavy, unfamiliar feeling in his chest. He walked into the mansion and found Camille waiting in the sitting room, arms crossed, eyes red from either crying or rage. It was hard to tell which with her anymore. You embarrassed me tonight, Camille said before he could speak. In front of guests. You threw a bucket of water on a woman trying to pick up her daughter. She's a maid, Nathaniel. This is what happens when staff get too comfortable. She's a person, Camille. His voice rose for the first time in longer than she could remember. What is wrong with you? Every single maid who's worked in this house has quit because of how you treat them. Everyone. Did you think I didn't notice the pattern? Camille's carefully composed mask cracked, just slightly. You don't understand what it's like, growing up with nothing and finally having everything, only to watch it constantly threatened by. By what? A maid asking careful questions about an old photograph. Camille froze. Priscilla told you, she whispered. Priscilla didn't tell me anything. I overheard the two of you talking 2 nights ago in the garden about an accident. About someone not recognizing you. About your face before surgery 10 years ago. Nathaniel's expression had gone cold, calculating. The businessman surfacing beneath the fiancée. What accident, Camille? The blood drained from Camille's face. It's nothing. Old history. It doesn't matter now. Then tell me. If it doesn't matter, tell me right now. Camille's mind raced. She had built an entire identity, an entire life, on the fact that nobody from her past could connect the polished, sculpted woman standing in this mansion to the reckless 21-year-old who fled a hit-and-run on Route 9 10 years ago, using her family's money and connections to erase every record, every photograph, every trace of the accident before it ever reached the news. Nobody except, apparently, a maid whose family had somehow been on the other end of that collision. I need some air, Camille said, and fled the room before Nathaniel could stop her. She stood on the terrace alone, hands trembling, staring out at the same driveway where she'd humiliated Elena hours earlier, and made a decision that would either save her carefully built life, or destroy it completely. She picked up her phone and called Priscilla. I need Elena Vance gone. Tonight. Whatever it takes. What happened at dawn the next morning would end everything Camille had spent 10 years building. Elena arrived for her shift at 7 a.m. as always, still sore from the humiliation of the night before but resolved to keep going for Sophie's sake. She barely made it through the front gate before Priscilla intercepted her, holding an envelope. You're being let go. Effective immediately. This is your final pay, plus a severance. Priscilla's voice was clipped, rehearsed. Miss Rousseau feels it's best for everyone. Elena's stomach dropped. Without this job, the after-school program, the rent, the last of her sister's medical debt, all of it would collapse within weeks. On what grounds? Elena asked, fighting to keep her voice steady. Does it matter? It was at that exact moment that Nathaniel's car pulled through the gate, returning from an early meeting. He saw Elena standing frozen with an envelope in her hands and Priscilla walking briskly away, and he knew immediately what had happened. Stop, he called out, stepping from the car. Elena, don't leave. Priscilla, get Camille out here. Now. Camille appeared on the front steps moments later, composed, cold, ready with a rehearsed explanation. Nathaniel, we discussed staffing changes. We discussed nothing. You did this behind my back. He turned to Elena. Tell me what you know. About the photograph. About the accident. All of it. Right now. Elena hesitated, glancing at Camille, whose eyes held a warning sharper than any blade. But she thought of her sister's limp, her mother's voice, Sophie's small hopeful face in the rearview mirror. 10 years ago, Elena said quietly, my older sister Marisol was hit by a car on Route 9. The driver fled the scene. She was in the hospital for 4 months. We never found who did it. The case went cold within weeks, which never made sense to my family, because there was a witness who saw part of the license plate. Camille's face had gone completely white. Last night, I overheard you tell Priscilla that if Nathaniel ever found out about, before the accident, everything would fall apart. And I saw a photograph of you from 10 years ago, standing next to a silver sedan with a dent above the rear wheel. The exact same make, model, and damage pattern as the car that hit my sister. The silence on that driveway was absolute. That's absurd, Camille finally said, her voice cracking despite her best efforts. Thousands of cars look like that. Then you won't mind if we call the police and let them compare the vehicle records, Nathaniel said quietly, pulling out his phone. Since apparently your family's lawyers were very thorough about erasing things 10 years ago, I'm sure a formal investigation will clear this up quickly, one way or another. Camille's composure finally shattered. It was an accident. A real accident. I panicked. I was young. My father's team handled everything before I even understood what was happening. I never meant for anyone to get hurt. You left an 18-year-old girl bleeding on the side of a road and drove away, Elena said, her voice trembling but strong. My sister still can't run. She still flinches at car horns. My family spent everything we had trying to help her heal, while you spent 10 years and probably a fortune erasing yourself from what you did. Camille sank onto the front steps, the mask she'd worn for a decade finally, completely gone. Whatever came next, police, lawsuits, the complete collapse of the life she'd built brick by careful brick, was now unavoidable. Nathaniel didn't comfort her. He simply looked at the woman he'd almost married with an expression of complete and total disillusionment, then turned to Elena. I'm calling the police, and I'm getting you and your sister a proper lawyer. Whatever this costs, I'll cover it. He paused. And you're not fired. You never were. If anyone's leaving this house today, it's her. 3 months later, the legal case moved forward with Camille facing charges for the decade-old hit and run. Her engagement to Nathaniel dissolved completely and publicly. Marisol finally received a settlement that covered the medical debt that had haunted the family for years. And more importantly, an apology, however late, however forced by circumstance rather than conscience. Elena stayed on at the Whitfield estate, not as a maid anymore, but eventually, over the following year, as someone closer to Nathaniel than either of them had expected. Not a fairy tale rushed into overnight, but a quiet friendship built on respect that slowly, carefully, became something more real than anything Camille had ever manufactured. Ophi got to grow up without the shadow of medical debt hanging over her mother's shoulders. Marisol finally got closure after 10 years of unanswered questions. And somewhere in that story is a simple truth worth remembering. The people the world overlooks, underestimates, and humiliates are so often carrying more strength, more dignity, and more truth than the people standing over them ever imagined. Never assume someone's worth based on what they wear, what they earn, or what job they hold. You never know whose quiet strength is about to change everything. If this story moved you, hit like, drop a comment telling me what part hit you hardest, and subscribe for more emotional stories every week. Thank you for staying until the end.